Item 2.1, we'll move on to the consent calendar, approval of the minutes. Does anybody have any corrections or additions? Member Perez?
I do have a question on the minutes. I was unable to attend the second day of the meeting, and I believe I spoke with you and a couple of others about bringing up, we had requested that within the minutes, there's a tally of outstanding items that the board has requested.
You're absolutely
so I
right.
understand that there was a recommendation that there would be a list.
Yes.
Where's the list? How often do we see the list?
There,
So I'm just asking for what the follow-up on that was.
I did request it, but I don't see it, so I will continue to follow up on that. Thank you for reminding me.
I will say that two of the things that you requested. One was that we meet with the State Board of Education, which is going to occur tomorrow. But there is a change of venue. We're going to meeting here. And we'll have the dinner at the Hyatt Regency, but we'll be meeting here. Second one is, you did request that we have a meeting in the Capitol. And the September meeting is scheduled for the Capitol. And it's, I confirmed that with Greg Schmidt, who is the Secretary of the Senate, just about a week ago. There's always a caveat, and that is if the budget is not signed by then, and the Budget Committee has to meet in room 4203, we will be moved out of it. But at the present time, we do have that room reserved. I believe it's 4202, excuse me, 4202. We do have that room reserved, and we will be meeting for the September meeting in the Capitol.
Thank you, Chancellor, for an update. I believe those are the goals that we set for the year.
Yeah.
What I'm referencing is during the board meeting, there's several items where a board member will ask for follow-up on an item.
Oh,
And
I'm
instead
sorry.
of us having to keep our own list of what those follow-up items are and when they will be addressed, we've asked for staff to maintain that list and make it available to us for review. That helps. So it's a little bit different. But thank you for the update on the goal.
Right. I will continue to work on that. Thank you. Any other minute additions or changes? Do I hear a motion to
So moved, Madam Chair.
Member McDonald and second by Member Thomas. Thank you. We'll move on to our action items. Item 3.1.
Want to vote?
I'm sorry. Sorry, a little out of practice. All in favor say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Opposed? And abstentions. Item 3.1, approval of contracts and grants.
If the board has any questions, we will respond.
Any questions about those items?
Madam Chair, I move the acceptance of the contract.
Thank you.
The grant.
Let me just see the second before. Second, thank you.
I was very happy to see one of the last grants that we did here. I just have to comment on it because I always bring it up. Was a grant that was for distant learning to further pursue that. And it was a competitive process. So I was a little bit surprised as to who the winner was because there's a couple of other colleges out there that are very innovative in leading these efforts. So happy to see it though, because it just means more of them will be doing this work. But I did want to comment.
I believe that item is Patrick Perry's, but Member Perez, it's the first series of grants that are in the works for promoting distant learning. Your wish is our command.
Don't encourage her.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Oppose or abstentions? Okay, the item has passed. On to item 3.2. I have a little footnote I forgot to mention earlier. Member Benita Haley had an injury. She hurt her knee, she says very clearly, immediately after playing tennis, not during playing tennis. So she was not able to come to our meeting at the last minute. Item 3.2, change to the procedures and standing orders of the Board of Governors.
Yes, thank you. This change is a follow-up on discussion the board has had at the last couple meetings in terms of board members sitting on the board of the Foundation for California Community Colleges. The desire was expressed to limit the number of board members, of Board of Governors members serving on the foundation board. And at the last meeting, the suggestion was made that the limitation be 25% of the total number. So this section 253 of the procedures has been changed to carry out that intent.
Any discussion?
I have a
Member
question.
McDonald?
The only question I would ask, or I would like to get a clarification on, it is stated in our regular, if we have more than 3 board members together, is that something against the Bagley-Keene Act?
Yes, that would be an issue at that point. It would mean that the Bagley-Keene Act is in effect if more than 3 members are on that committee. As it is, the Foundation for California Community Colleges currently complies with the Brown Act, which matches the requirements of the Bagley-Keene Act. So as a practical matter, I don't think that's a very significant issue.
My point is, if we have 3 or more on, if we, of that 25%, if we have 3 or more, then we're under the Bagley-Keene Act, and there's a change there.
It would require the notice procedures to be implemented for purposes
very good.
of that meeting, yes.
All right, just
Okay, thank you.
First off, I'll move approval of the motion. But,
Thank you.
The question I had was, I think it's good that we have made these appointments and that we have 2 very able Board of Governors members. That was unprecedented. So is there a specific reason that we're just formalizing that this number other than Badgley-Keene? Is it to retain the autonomy of the foundation as well?
Yeah, those were the reasons expressed by Foundation President Paul Lanning at a previous meeting. And Paul, I don't know if you'd like to come up and address this, but yes, it is to retain the autonomy to ensure that the foundation maintains its status as something other than a state agency, and it's for reasons such as that. But Paul, I'll let you elaborate.
Yeah, I think actually Vice Chancellor Bruckman summarized it well. The public agency issue, state agency issue is a significant concern, number one. Number two, as you all know, Senate Bill 330 is under consideration right now, and one of the, I think, reasons for the genesis of that bill is a lack of separation between certain public institutions and their nonprofit affiliated foundations, particularly in other institutions outside the community colleges. But it's very important to us to maintain the reason why we were formed originally, which is to act as a semi-autonomous, semi-private nonprofit support to the community college system, office, chancellor, and board of governors. And so in doing so, limiting the voting influence of the Board of Governors on our board and maintaining a separation of those 2 governing boards is somewhat important in that process.
No, I appreciate your leadership on that and this board's leadership. For example, our meeting this morning over at the hotel was supported by the foundation, and it would be be considered if we had too many Board of Governors members, we would be voting ourselves to
Precisely.
through private funding. And so I appreciate you making sure we're in compliance and doing everything properly.
Yes,
I'll second his motion.
thank you. Any other discussion? All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed and abstentions?
We should thank the foundation again for their
Yes,
support
thank
of
you.
this
It was a
morning's,
lovely breakfast.
program.
Thank you. It was a great event, and we're just thrilled to be a part of it, so thank you very much.
Thank you. My eyes are still adjusting because it seems so dark in here. It
does.
was so bright in that room. It was gorgeous. Moving on to item 3.3, appointments to Accounting Ethics Committee. Can you please explain this a little bit,
Yes, thank you.
please?
Last year, the legislature enacted a bill, SB 819, intended generally to address some of the concerns in the accounting practices in the state of California, reflecting nationwide concerns, to have greater transparency among various elements of the accounting industry. And one element of that bill was to have a committee, an ethics advisory committee, and the statute specifically provided that 2 community college accounting instructors should serve on that committee. We consulted with the academic senate. 2 recommendations were submitted. Mr. Gary Peroni from, let's see, where's from, I don't see where, from Diablo Valley College, and John Mickelson from Monterey Peninsula College. are the two who were recommended by the Academic Senate. So we're asking the board to approve the appointments to the Ethics Committee.
Member Davis Lyman and Member Thomas.
I move approval.
Oh, thank you.
Second?
Who said second?
Second.
Manuel.
Member Baca. Did you have a question,
I
Member
do.
Thomas?
Can you tell me who this committee reports to? What kind of a bit of what do they do, and who do they answer to, or who do they report their findings or whatever the recommendation?
They would be reporting to the legislature, and they would provide recommendations on good practices in higher education, accounting, in terms of ethics. I've been advised that the curriculum already has an ethics component in it, but that will be clarified and amplified and that sort of thing.
Thank you.
I have, I'm sorry, you go
I
ahead.
should have held them. I might add that also their appointments to the Board of from the Board of Regents.
Yes.
And from the CSU Board of Trustees.
That's right.
We were unaware of the bill until it was called to our attention. Who are your appointments? And so suddenly we realized, wait a minute, the Board of Governors are supposed to appoint 2 members to this committee.
That's what I was going to say, is Senator Leland Yee sent a letter to us, and he said there are 11 positions, and it says the Board of Accountancy is anxious to begin the work of the committee, so they might also report to the Board of Accountancy. Member Bell?
So as far as we know, this is an advisory board to look at instruction of accountants.
Correct.
To ensure that ethics is integrated into their
Exactly.
practice. So it doesn't have any disciplinary or sanctioning authority for.
No.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Well, I'm glad that somebody thought to include community college instructors, because we probably train many accounting professionals more than any other segment.
Thank you. I believe I have a second, right? Yes. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Oppose, and abstentions. Moving on to item 3.4, reappointment of George Caplan to the Board of Directors for the Foundation for California Community Colleges.
Yes, I'm back. This item is in regard to the fact that Member Caplan's term expired as of the end of the fiscal year, and he has agreed and would like to, and I believe Chancellor Scott had got the chance to speak with him as well recently. He has expressed his interest in continuing with the Board of Directors for the foundation. I think most of you, if not all of you, have certainly encountered Mr. Caplan at various points during his service to the community college system, either on the Board of Governors or on the foundation board. And he has come up for reappointment today for what is now a 6-year term on the foundation board, and this would complete our board as it's currently constituted at 9 members.
Okay. Any discussion?
I'd just like to make that a point.
Thank you, Member Reed and Member Azumi.
Second.
Thank you. I'm not sure many members on this board know George Caplan, but he was a very strong leader, and he brought the strategic plan forward, and I am a very big supporter, so I'm looking forward to this. Member Azumi?
And I'd like to, second what you just said, President Malumet. I know a number of us had the pleasure of working with George Caplan when he was a member of the board and as president. He was a very strong leader of the board. There were some rough times during his presidency, but he was a real rock and provided a great rudder for the board during those times. And I came to admire him greatly, I think that he would be a terrific continued addition to the board foundation.
Member Baca?
But I too would want to express my appreciation for his desire to continue to work with us. I had the opportunity to meet him and work with him a little bit with the strategic plan. And so found him to be someone who is very articulate, obviously very successful in the work that he does outside of his public service, but just want to express that.
Thank you, thank you. Any other comments? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, and abstentions.
Thank you, and I believe he will be here tonight for the dinner, so I look forward to all of you who have not yet interacted with him, seeing him this evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I was going to ask. Moving on to item 3.1, 2011-12 capital outlay projects. Thank you very much for bringing this back to us in a very clear way to understand, with new thoughts perhaps, so thank you.
You're welcome. Fred Harris with the Chancellor's Office. It's a pleasure to be before you again this morning. This is the action item to support the annual capital outlay plan for 2011-12. We have 81 projects totaling $473.6 million. Of that amount, there are numerous New Start projects. There are 14 what we call ready access projects. Districts are taking advantage of the option to get all of their appropriations in one legislative appropriation. And also there are 2 design build projects, the first state-funded design build projects for community colleges. So this is a robust plan. There is movement within the legislature. It is, shall we say, movement on the Senate Appropriations suspense file. But AB 220 has funds for community colleges and for education for a bond act. And we still cross our fingers and hope that the recognition of both the public benefit of providing access, but also of stimulating the economy through construction will be recognized. And we have this plan before you to participate in that effort and seek your I vote.
Any discussion or questions? Member Thomas?
Yes, I think this is exciting and certainly support the idea of new and modernized facilities. However, I just want to express my concern about the reality of the current funding levels and the impact on the ability to have folks be able to staff and maintain those new and more modern facilities in the future, because it appears that we have opportunities for growth and expansion in the areas of facilities, but many districts are cutting back in terms of staffing. And so I just wanted to voice my deep concern for that aspect of our system.
I don't think there was a question there. I acknowledge that particular effort. We do long-range planning. These buildings are being built for several decades, and I believe it can be demonstrated easily that the need is there. And it's just unfortunate that the cycles of support funding are going through a particular downward trend right now. Our need for $35 billion worth of need over the next 10 years for facilities is awesome, and this is a drop in that bucket.
Member Bell?
Again, I've asked this question before, too. Thank you for this, because this, I think, does a very good job of clarifying the process.
We heard the need, and we decided to redraft it for you all.
So how will you be disseminating this among the districts? Because a concern I'd raise sometimes is that some districts seem to be very good and understand the process and know how to get projects in the pipeline, and then there's some districts that aren't as active in looking to this as a source of possible capital funding. So what will be the outreach process?
Well, let me kind of step back. In terms of attachment C is what's before you for action. Those are specific projects which funding, once it's approved and the districts, meet the particular milestones in the planning process to receive the funds, would receive the funds through the normal capital outlay process through the Public Works Board. But more to your point, in terms of the capital outlay process and the decision of what projects are considered and then prioritized for state funding, all depend on a district providing projects to the Chancellor's Office for consideration. We had, I think, roughly 52 districts of 72 represented in this particular list of projects. And we do our darndest to reach out to districts several times. I mean, they have an annual requirement to submit to us a 5-year capital outlay plan for consideration, and some districts still choose not to do that. But if they don't submit that plan, then they can't be considered for capital outlay. So that could be one limiting factor right there.
Sure, and I don't want to say that it's not for lack of trying on behalf of the system office to encourage districts to engage. I just wanted to understand how a little bit.
Well, in terms of process-wise, I'd commend you to the attachment in terms of the grant process. Right. And if there are any specific questions, I'm more
along the lines of then how do you make sure the districts are aware of the process? Are there meetings on a regular basis? You asked for the annual capital outlay, the 5-year plan. What else?
Well, there is the annual facilities conference in November, the Community College Facilities Coalition. I keep about 4 different listserv lists that I personally make sure that the names are up to date. And there's a list for facilities planners, a list for chief business officers, and I regularly send out information regarding the annual submittal for plans. And if they aren't receiving that information, if like my email is being blocked for whatever reason, I'd get information in that regard.
Yeah, sure,
so
no.
we can lead the horse to water, but sometimes they may not want to
and
drink.
I found some districts also feel that through their local bond measures, they can raise the funds needed for capital improvements and have chosen to forego the other capital.
There is that factor in terms of in our rating of projects, 25% of the score is based on the local contribution to the project, but not and the majority of districts are participating with a local contribution because that helps enhance their competition. But not all projects need or have a local match, a local contribution, and that just goes to the merit of the project. So I wouldn't say that having a bond is the only determiner, but 64 of our 72 districts have local bonds in various degrees of expenditure.
Thank you, Fred.
Member Ramos and Member McDougall and Member Chancellor.
Thank you very much. I have a question that is sort of a broader policy question for the future more than this particular set of proposals.
Sure.
But I think it's important for us to put it on the table. What is our positioning on this kind of work relative to green construction? What kind of threshold requirements, either state or federal, are these facilities subject to? And what kind of role might we be able to encourage as a Board of Governors going forward to ensure that we are not just meeting the minimums on those requirements, but actually incentivizing the highest possible standards, the highest movement towards new technologies, and the creation of new jobs in those emerging industries?
That's an excellent question, and pardon me for my cold. I tried to limit my comments, but the whole aspect of incenting, because we believe that's how our capital program works best in terms of incentivizing. And beginning in the 10-11 year, districts were provided the opportunity, if they exceed Title 24 by 2% for new construction, 3% for new construction and 2% for modernization, 10% for modernization and 15% for new construction, that they would get an equivalent 2 or 3% bump in their capital outlay appropriation. And of the 52 districts that submitted projects, they all submitted that information and were requesting that. So again, by enhancing the pot of money, again in a small amount, we find that districts are readily doing it. Now, I'd like to say that is the cause. One of the causes is there is a Board of Governors policy from about 3 years ago that articulates this in terms of, and it began with the 10-11 year. But I think more importantly, that districts on their own are realizing the importance of meeting the various LEED and other standards for because it's just a smart use of the capital money, which right now, as Member Thomas pointed out, is we're a relatively flush, but not really. We still have an outstanding amount of need, but that by making those investments with the capital dollars, you're able to minimize, if not reduce, impacts on the support budget, and therefore create the opportunities that you need for providing instruction on the campuses. But bottom line is that incentive process is in place, and it's still rolling out. One of the things that we did is we coordinated that with the investor-owned utilities, what's called the new construction or savings by design types of programs. And so if a district applies for that in their state capital outlay program project, that they concurrently both apply for the Board of Governors incentive, but also apply for the utilities incentive. So the win-win that we're trying to create is, and then we have the utilities joining forces early on in the project to enhance the project and make it as energy efficient as possible. So those are the different efforts that we're taking so far, along with a variety of other efforts to ensure that energy conservation and energy efficiency is realized.
Thank you.
Member McDougall.
Yeah, just a comment and two questions. First, a comment in response to Board Member Ramos's question. I think one of the incentives that are present for the local districts in moving toward as green, if you will, a environment as possible are the financial incentives that are provided by the major utility companies. Those are pretty significant in their magnitude and really do provide a lot of push in moving that way. First question has to do with the comment about the 25% of the score for the projects being based upon local funding.
Yes.
If there is not local funding, will projects actually qualify if they don't have that 25%? It would seem extremely difficult to be able to qualify without the local funding.
It is, again, it's 200 points. 50 points is based on up to 50% of a district's contributing to the state supportable cost of a project. And so that means 3/4 of the score, or 150 points, is based on the merits of the project, how it meets instructional needs. And a lot of projects, again, the majority of them are contributing to the project because the majority of districts have local bonds, and they see the win-win type of arrangement that can occur by leveraging local dollars with state dollars, and it's a win-win for the state to leverage the state dollars with local dollars. But there are those projects, because of their meeting 3/4 of the score in a big way. It's a high priority project. Can and do get funded. But
Can and do.
Can and do. But the majority of them are contributing money because we zero base the list of projects every year, and you never know where the funding will run out on a priority basis. And we like to keep districts hungry in that regard on an incentivized basis so that we can use as much the state dollars to fund as many projects as possible.
I understand that. I just recognize that although the college can exert that initiative, sometimes the community's different in their responsiveness, and
yes,
it can be a serious problem in some situations. Second question is a little more difficult, I think, to answer, but one of the things that's hard to discern from this list as a board member is how well we as a system are accommodating both the need for renovation and improvement of facilities and the need for new facilities. Because it gives an amount, but it's hard to know what we might think is minimally acceptable and what we think is ideal. And I'm just asking more for an opinion from your standpoint. Are we falling behind in this area? Are we reasonably maintaining both health and safety conditions and accommodating growth where necessary? What is your view, having worked with this as long as you have and having the insights that you do?
Well, falling behind, I think from a state perspective, because there hasn't been a bond since 2006, and we're basically, as you'll see in the 2010-11 list, there were 13 projects funded for roughly $130 million. And basically, a lot of that was bid savings and residuals that were left over. We're basically scraping the bottom of the barrel. But we're doing the planning horizon with the hope of a new bond in 2010. I don't ever like to think in terms of falling behind, because I always want to have that hope and achievement of continuing to meet those needs. But from a 5-year from a 10-year perspective, based on our system-wide 5-year plan, we have $35 billion worth of need as a system that we estimate as part of that process. And that plan should be coming before you for the next year at the next board meeting. And so that perspective we can discuss even more in depth, but I'd commend you to the plan. We've got districts who have, made a commitment since November 2000 for $22.8 billion of local bond monies to meet the needs that began at that particular point in time. I just think that we are experiencing such a renaissance in terms of the renovation and the expansion of our physical plant in the system. I'd hate to think that we're falling behind, but we're not ever going to meet the need, and I don't believe we'll ever have enough money to meet all of that need. But stating the need and recognizing the need, I think, is our strongest point, and that's what we continue to want to do and to identify in an analytical way.
You understand the basis for my question. The basis for my question is that when we approve a plan such as this, of course, it's wonderful to be able to approve something such as this, but it's hard to see what the need is and how well we're responding to that. And it's hard to see the context.
Yes.
So I would hope at maybe some future meeting, you could provide a good overview that would provide us with the context of what has happened historically, what we perceive as the overall needs, what the directions are to try to meet that need, et cetera.
It would be my pleasure to do that, and if I could do that at when we bring the 5-year plan, I think that would be the right context to do that.
I'd find it helpful anyway.
Okay, thank you. Chancellor Scott, and then Member Perez and Member Lockyer.
Okay. One thing that is helpful, if you spend a lot of time, you learn a lot. And since I've been in the community college system since the 1970s, I will make a few observations. One is the situation we have now is we've tightened up where that colleges understand that they have to go through the process. I remember the days when sometimes colleges got funding based upon the prominence of a legislator rather than the nature of the request. And we've pretty much ruled that out. I always spoke out against that, and so we don't have that problem anymore. And the green issue is a wonderful issue. For one thing, the concern that Board Member Thomas expressed, sometimes the green reduces the operational expense of a college, and therefore, even though the staffing might be less, even changing lighting can give you some additional monies and some other things that you can do. And it does have to do partially with district activity. We can say that there are a few colleges maybe that are understaffed, but sometimes colleges just don't have the same energy level in terms of getting this done. I'm reminded of that old story of the man who kept, he offered a prayer up, said, "Lord, help me win the lottery." And he did that about 5 or 6 times, and finally there was a voice from heaven that said, "Buy a ticket." Some of these colleges don't really buy the ticket they ought to buy in terms of turning out the kind of work and effort, because it does take a lot of work and effort to get the facilities request in, and we do place that burden on the colleges, but the reward is tremendous when they do their facilities and follow them. So it's always a difficult thing that Fred and his office is called upon to do. We have all these requests, and we attempt to have a procedure that measures it, not in a subjective way, but in an objective way, so that, for instance, classroom capacity, all of those things are measured extremely carefully. And you're not going to get a classroom if you, according to the rules and so forth, if your classroom space now is sufficient to serve the number of students that you have. So I'm just adding those few comments to kind of maybe do a little clarification as far as the board is concerned. Obviously, and I think Peter's exactly right, Board Member McDougall, when he says that there are districts that have differing bonding capacity, and it's not always based upon the wealth of a district. And sometimes the wealthiest districts are the ones that are the most reluctant to vote for a bond. Right. I can tell you a county northeast of here that they haven't had a history yet of voting yes on a bond. And so that kind of puts the college in a tough situation simply because of the climate that exists in that community that tends to be an anti-bond climate. Sometimes the urban districts where there's a higher level of poverty are the ones that, interestingly enough, are most open to voting for a bond. Now, it's been a tremendous boost that when we went from 67% to 55%.
No doubt.
Community colleges hardly ever had a bond campaign when they had to get 2/3 vote. But now that they only have to get a 55% vote, about 90%, if I'm correct, maybe Fred, you can point this out, about 90% of those who go out for a bond succeed. And so that's been a great help to community colleges as far as local bonding.
It's been huge. The previous 10 years before Prop 39, 10 districts were successful at passing local bonds at the 2/3 threshold. So going from 10 districts to 64 districts, I think, speaks for itself as to the success of that effort.
Thank you for your comments. Member Perez.
Just a couple things. I often hear it referenced that we work very closely with the IOUs on savings by design, and I just want to encourage staff to work beyond the IOUs because the municipals also have savings by design programs and are very successful and have incentives available to our local community colleges to actually do improvements to their buildings as well. So I always hear the IOU statement, but there's municipals throughout the state that are very successful in that as well.
And the IOUs, as you know, only cover 80% of the state, and that's a sizable amount, but there is a lot of municipalities, and we want to reach out to them also.
And so I would encourage you not to just want to reach out, but to actually reach out to them. So the other thing I would say is that, retrofits are very critical, as Chancellor had stated. If you can retrofit a building, there's cost savings associated with that, and as a result, those funds can actually be put back into the school system, for instruction, basic skills, counseling, whatever it is that the school feels a need. So I'm looking at the categories here, and I'm trying to determine where that fits within the categories. So is it within category C and within category F that the retrofit fits?
Yes.
So then basically there's about 30% of the budget that can be allocated towards the retrofit. And the one thing I would ask is that to make that a little bit more prominent, that because it's embedded in there and because I know this, I can identify it, but most people might not be able to see that. And that, if we were to highlight that better to encourage the local campuses to do retrofits, it's a long-term gain overall for them to do that. Because even if they build new buildings and the new buildings are more energy efficient, there's still going to be a drain on the system by the buildings that need to be retrofitted not being energy efficient, and there's a higher cost associated with running that. So if there's a way that we can incorporate this, I think that would be good.
And Member Flores, I couldn't agree with you more. I know when we came with the new system of funding and prioritizing capital outlay roughly at the turn of the century, that there was such an emphasis on growth only, and that modernizing our existing plant was not underemphasized. And I think we find generally that districts have, because of the competition factor in, as you nicely identified the categories, but in categories B and E, in the growth categories, districts are more and more waking up based on our interaction with them, I think, in large part, to doing modernization. And we're finding roughly half of the projects coming in now are modernization projects. But again, the energy savings are in that retrofit of the plant, for sure.
And then just lastly, it looks like the budget is for 11 and 12.
Yes.
It's for projects that will be over the next 10 years. And I think you alluded to this, Chancellor, but I just want to confirm that I'm assuming that we're taking into consideration the downturn in students that are, we're being able to serve on the campuses and the capacity issues associated with that. And so as we're looking, for the next 10 years, we're also taking that into consideration as well. We're not building beyond our capacity to serve based on having teachers or having students. And as we're looking to increase in a competitive environment with our competitors out there that are offering distant learning and things like that, there's less need for space on campuses. That's all being taken into consideration.
Yes, it is. In terms of, as the Chancellor alluded to, the eligibility criteria is the shorthand is called capacity load ratio. And the capacity obviously is the square footage that you currently have based on state standards. The load is based on the number of students, and we annually do an enrollment projection in terms of, and that is adjusted annually to adjust the eligibility for that particular year.
So are we only doing projections on a year-to-year basis, but are we actually doing, because this is over a 10-year period.
It's a 10-year projection.
Okay, so it is a 10-year, okay,
Yes.
that's what I wanted to
And it's really, the 7 years are the most purposeful, because that's usually for a project being funded in the budget year. It's the 7th year usually when it's fully occupied and manifested. And so, yes, it's a 10-year projection. And we're currently in a process right now of updating the enrollment projection model that is being used, and have entered into a arrangement with the RP group to look at ways to, with the new technologies and new opportunities for looking at doing more accurate enrollment projections. And that's a 2-year effort that we look forward to even having a more enhanced model for use.
Thank you. Okay, thank you. Member Lockyer?
Yes, I wanted to encourage Board Member Ramos and anyone else that is prioritizing the greening of the buildings to come to Alameda County and visit Ohlone College. The community college there has a fairly new facility that is just renowned in the greening of everything there, that has resulted in substantial savings costs, and I'm sure that you could give some other examples. And I really appreciated Board Member McDougall's comments, as well as the Chancellor's comments about the prioritizing of the funding. And for our own purposes of education, I wanted to use what really stood out to me as an opportunity for us to be educated about, how different capacity possibilities and or needs in a specific district can result in such a large cost of a project to be funded. For example, what stood out is the San Francisco, the Performing Arts Complex, that ends up being about a quarter of the total budget or plan that we're being asked to approve. And that's a new complex, is my understanding. And understanding that to how can a project of that magnitude be such a difference for the Rancho Santiago Community College Arts Center that's $1.5 million. So if you can educate us about that evaluation, that would be great.
It would be my pleasure to. First of all, just as the overview, that's why we created this particular item, because we recognize there are several new board members, and we want to at least give you the initial implant on process. And I know that might be a little hard to swallow, but first of all, the different phases of a project are preliminary plans, working drawings, construction, and equipment. And as you'll see in the 11-12 list, the bulk of the projects are listed as a PW if you look under the phase column. Preliminary plans and working drawings generally represent 10 to 15% of the cost of a project. And so you're not necessarily, if you're doing the PW to CE kind of comparison, you're not doing apples and oranges in terms of relative weight of funding of a project. So I just commend you to that particular notion. Probably a little more apples and apples, even though it's dependent on the project and the district's eligibility, would be on the ready access projects, which are all phases of a project were funded at the same time, which are on page 4. All of those projects, they do vary depending on what they're trying to accomplish, but we prioritize each year based on new start projects, and once a project is funded for, in essence, at PW phase, it will then, its CE phase doesn't have to, in essence, recompete. The whole project is approved initially. And I can go into much more detail, but
That's okay. I was trying to get a gauge as to whether or not, out of the one of the 6 capital outlay project priorities, if those had an order. That's where you were getting at also, Board Member McDougall. So is there some priority of order with those priorities itself?
Yes, there are. And again, so just to finish the point, San Francisco, of course, is a CE, and that's why it was getting the lion's share of the dollars. The Board of Governors' priorities are articulated, and I don't know if this copy came across very well, but you'll see a matrix on page 4 of Appendix A. And first off, we basically say health and safety projects are Category A, or the highest priority. And so we through the consultative process and through the discussion with the Board of Governors, we established that up to 50% of any year's funding would be provided for health and safety project. We've never hit that particular threshold, but we're recognizing that health and safety is a priority for the state. And so those projects in Category A would be first be funded. Categories B would be up to 50% of the remaining funds would go for growth of instructional projects. And then for Category C is the modernization of instructional space. Up to 25% of the remaining funds after Category A would be going for modernization of instructional space. Category D is an interesting category, and if you're outside of community colleges, it's difficult to relate to, but we call it the complete campus category. Generally, the projects that get funded here on a priority basis are child development centers, PE facilities, instructional facilities, and child development centers. If I said that, I meant performing arts centers. All instructional types of buildings. Those are the projects that either you're a relatively new campus, you don't have these facilities to begin with, or the particular facilities, if the other districts that don't have facilities have already been funded at the year that we've received projects, we would then fund on a priority basis those types of projects. I'll just finish up real quickly because I see the glazing over effect here. Category E is the growth category for instructional support projects, and Category F is for the modernization instructional support. They each get 5%. And so there is a general guideline for funding in that regard, and if we run out of projects and have money, then that money gets shifted over to other priorities. But again, the priorities for health and safety, up to 50%. After 50% of the remaining goes to instructional growth. Up to 25% of that for instructional goes for modernization and ad nauseum.
Okay. Member Lockyer, did you have more questions?
Again, for purposes of education and our effective use of our positions, were those priorities in that order, Chancellor and Sir, set by the Board of Governors? And when has there been, any thought or discussion on that? Or is that an order of priorities and percentages within each category? Was that set by the Board of Governors?
It's probably wiser to direct that question to Fred Harris, since I've only been here a year and a half, and to my knowledge, these priorities, at least I remember back 20 years ago, health and safety was always the first priority. I know Board Member McDougall, who was president of Santa Barbara City College, worked very closely with an extensive building program there, and so perhaps your memory can come into work here, Peter.
I'll
let's
test
hear
Fred's memories
Fred
first.
Harris.
Okay.
Go
You
on.
see,
Yeah.
we'll turn to the expert. Let's let Fred tell us when they were set. And as you would imagine, when literally millions of dollars are at stake, it was rather hotly debated. But I think it's been pretty well appreciated that the order that he gave there was established as perhaps priorities, because we knew a long time ago, for instance, parking would never be paid for. We were aware that certain instructional things were considered perhaps of a little less importance than other instructional matters. A science building, for instance, normally received some precedence over, say, a physical education facility. And I'm not sure when those were all hammered out and so forth, but maybe we'll ask you, Fred. We'll test your memory.
Well, the quick answer is yes, these were approved by the Board of Governors. When I came to the Chancellor's office last century, there were only 3 priorities, A, B, and C. It was very easy. People loved it to death. A was health and safety, B was growth, and C was complete campus, and that was it. I became acutely aware that we had a need to balance out growth with modernization, and so we went through a very long 2-3 year consultative process to expand the categories and have come up with what you see. I think they were approved by the Board of Governors in 2000 and have been in existence and in operation since then. And I not to be too overbearing on this, but I would commend the point that the Chancellor was making as far as under an ABC prioritization system, a lot of priorities were established over in the legislature because people didn't really see the fairness in that. And having gone through the consultative process and approved by the board, districts saw both the balance, that there were rules that people were following and that were enforced. And I think it's both been deemed as beneficial, and if nothing else, you could say it's kept order by having them articulated in this way. That doesn't mean that they can't change. I would love to chat with you individually and as a group in terms of your thoughts on how to further enhance this to meet the needs of the system. But it was a process. These are Board of Governors priorities and approved by the board.
Thank you. Member, I'm sorry, are you finished?
I'm
Member
done.
Lucker?
Thank you.
Okay. Member Davis-Lyman.
Is there any, I'd like to ask another question along the line of Member Thomas's question about staffing. Is there any part of the proposal that talks about additional staffing needed? In any of these categories? I've looked through, I can't discern.
I would say, no, that's not a consideration. These are state bond dollars that are being expended for these projects, and staffing costs cannot be paid out of those particular bond dollars. Not that that answers your question, but I just want to make that point. And so capacity load in terms of the space and the amount of students driving that space, or if it's instructional support space, FTEF could be a factor to that, but that's a subcomponent at best.
So nowhere does the public get any sense. The public is informed on how these dollars are going to be spent, what they're proposed for building-wise, but then the functioning of the building and the programs and that piece is totally left out. There isn't even a paragraph that addresses that, or something that supports that this is how we intend to put this building into action.
These are proposals that are done in partnership with the districts, and I'd hope that that would be something that would have been thought through and articulated at the district level.
But we do not ask for that.
That is not a prerequisite for funding, no.
Okay, thank you.
Member Baum and Member McDougall.
And I just want to get clarity, too, on the action that we're taking, too. So,
yes.
So if we vote to approve this,
yes.
And I made the motion that.
Thank you.
So, for example, the San Francisco City College of San Francisco, the Phelan campus, are we actually then approving the granting of them of the bond dollars of $38.2 million?
You are basically approving a plan that is then submitted to the Department of Finance and is considered to be part of the governor's budget on January 10th of next year. And so if I was getting the sense of your questions, we're not necessarily appropriating the dollars yet.
Right.
We're making a proposal to the governor to include this in his governor's budget.
Okay. And then,
or her governor budget.
And so then, on the ready access phasing future bond projects too, is that pending another bond? I mean, the bond that would pass in 2006 essentially would fund these, correct?
The bond that would pass in November 2010 would have to fund all of these projects. As you'll notice, they're all noted with future bond.
Okay. Oh, I see. So, and is that still on the ballot?
AB 220 it's not on the ballot yet. It is made its way through the legislative process and is on the Senate to a certain degree. It's on the Senate appropriations suspense list, and I believe leadership now has to decide what it's going to do for whether or not an education bond will appear on the 2010 ballot.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Member McDougall and then Member Davis-Lyman again.
Yeah, a couple of comments. One, I think our discussion on this has been very good discussion, at least from my perspective. Second, I think periodically it's good to examine our bases for doing business and how long ago we established the premises of how we will do business. So I think it might be worthwhile to know when these guidelines were established. I think Fred, as I recall his comments, mentioned 2000. Well, that's about 10 years ago. And the question is, from the standpoint of the staff, is there a need to review those mechanisms that are now in place? And I think we at least asked that fundamental question, whether review is appropriate. And so I would just ask that if the chancellor would take that under consideration and maybe get back to us. No, we feel very comfortable with the methods we have in place, or second, it might be a good time to take a relook at our assumptions about how we allocate our dollars for capital construction projects.
Good thought. And Member Davis-Lyman.
Right. That's a wonderful idea that Board Member McDougall has just put before us. And as we're looking at that, I think if we're calling this a plan, the plan has to have some section in it about staffing. I mean, in my mind, there's got to be something about, we've got these gorgeous buildings, even though that is not the funding mechanism. But if we're going to call this a plan, a total plan would have some paragraph in there of how we're going to address the staffing of this new, beautiful lab, whatever it is, science building, learning resource center, whatever. So if that could be part of what Board Member McDougall talked about, I'd like to see that also. Thank you.
Well, Chancellor Scott has a thought.
The problem, I think, with that is that's a matter of legislation. We could ask for staffing to be included, but right now, the legislature, all the bonding that's done for higher education and for K through 12 education does not include a staffing component. And obviously, if that were added, that would add a great deal to the expense of the bonds. So my guess would be, I have to be honest with you to say that there would be some legislative resistance to that, because you would be able, and I fully understand what you're talking about, but let's say you have a $10 million structure, and somebody says, and that increases our staffing requirements by $100,000. Well, that would have to be added to the bond. And the problem with that is that the staffing is an ongoing expense, whereas the facility is a one-time expense. So I'm not disputing the fact that sometimes the addition of facilities increase the staffing expense. But you must keep in mind that before that could happen, that would have to be something that would be enacted in legislation. And immediately that would mean, of course, that there would be a smaller amount of buildings that could be built for the same amount of money. Now, sometimes there are colleges, private universities, that get a donation for the building of a building, and they build in it an endowment that also takes care of the staffing for that new building. And of course, if you can talk a donor into that, that's great. But I'm just going to say to you that it's fine for us to talk about this, but we have to realize that we're now beyond, we can make decisions here about how we're going to spend, how we're going to prioritize bond money, but we can't make decisions here about taking bond money and using it for staffing. We could recommend that to the legislature.
Member Davis-Lyman.
Thank you so much, Chancellor, for those comments. And I'm aware that it can't be it's not the funded part of the bond, but somewhere in the plan, and it doesn't mean it's going to be funded by the bond money, if there could be mention of proposed staffing or something. I understand it's not part of the funding process, but the plan should have some mention of that in it somewhere. And I'm glad that maybe we're going to have an opportunity now, and the Chancellor will help us with the staff look at this whole process again. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Okay, I forgot. Do I have a second? I heard a first from Member Baum, second from Member Izumi. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed or abstentions? Well, it is 12:30. I was going to break for lunch at 12:30, and we'll come back at 1:15, hopefully. And thank you, Paul Lanning. I thought I might have you earlier, but we'll just see you after lunch. Lunch break. We're going to start with item 4.1, Accreditation Task Force Report.
And that's me.
You and Barbara Davis Lyman, who's a few minutes behind you, I
Okay, well,
hope.
she asked me to lead off.
Okay, thank
If you
you.
want me to go ahead, I'll start.
Yes, we are excited to hear.
Okay. We continue working on our strategy. To kind of renew what happened, the Accreditation Task Force was formed by the Consultation Council, and it had a representative from almost every group in the community college, the CEO board, faculty groups, FAC and CTA are represented, the CIOs, the Chief Instructional Officers, Barbara Davis Lyman from the Board of Governors, Manuel Payan from the Classified, and I'm probably missing somebody, but I can't think of who it is. But anyway, and myself. And as we've reported before, we weren't totally pleased with the interaction with the commission because of their more or less resistance to it. I miss Jane Patton. That's who I'm missing. There she is. And when I saw her, I failed to call her name. Jane Patton, representing the Academic Senate. But there have been complaints that the process that was used to select commissioners was not a process that was in keeping with the bylaws of the commission. In fact, the CEO board sent a letter, Scott Lay sent a letter from the CEO board and the trustees indicating a concern there, and that did lead to some reformation. But as far as Jane Patton could recall, the Academic Senate had not been consulted in the last 5 or 6 years, despite the fact that a number of faculty senate or academic senate people were placed on the commission. So the Accreditation Task Force determined that they would send a formal letter of complaint to the Department of Education about this matter, which we did, and the Department of Education then in turn wrote a letter asking the Accrediting Commission to document the process that they had used in the last 5 years in the selection of commission members. So we have not yet heard as to exactly how that's come out, but I just thought I would report to you as to what has happened in terms of the Accreditation Task Force. The Accrediting Commission itself did meet in June, but I have not yet received a report on the Accrediting Commission and what sanctions were taken. We do know that Peralta, the Peralta Community College District, was placed on probation, which places those 4 colleges on probation because of their fiscal condition. Our office is working closely with Peralta, trying to improve that situation, and Tom Henry has been sent there in order to do a study of that nature. So that's just a brief report as to what has happened.
Questions? Member McDougall?
Just a technical question. The placement of the Peralta district, I thought the Accreditation Commission only dealt with colleges, but not...
They placed all 4 of the colleges on probation.
Oh, so all 4 colleges were visited and all 4 were deemed to be in a probationary status?
Because of the fiscal condition of the district.
Fiscal condition.
But I would say that that district is in probably not in good fiscal condition. However, they have brought in a individual to improve the fiscal condition, Tom Henry, who works very closely with colleges and K through 12 schools on improving, and they have made an appointment of an interim chancellor, Wise Allen, And they, incidentally, the president of the board, the vice president of the board, Elihu Harris, the outgoing chancellor, and Wise Allen met with a group of us to discuss their fiscal condition and what steps they're taking. Okay.
Any other questions or comments from our board?
And one other thing, I'm going to ask that Jerry pass out the packet that simply is my mid-year report that I mentioned earlier. I thought that I would not give it out to you before I made my chancellor's remarks. I didn't want you to be reading it while I was making this scintillating speech. But anyway, that's it. Okay.
Let's see, we have one speaker on this, Nahasi Lee.
Could you tell us where he's from?
From Compton
A student?
Community Educational Center.
There you go.
Great, thanks.
Hello, folks. My name is Nahasi Ronald Lee. I'm a student at the Compton Community Educational Center. I'm also a two-time past policy board representative for the California Student Association of Community Colleges. I happen to be coming to the area today, or this weekend, to meet with the Student Senate. And since I looked at your agenda and saw that there were a couple of items on here that I might be able to contribute some information in regards to, I thought I'd stop and say hello and let you view the face of someone or a student who has received the full retributive hand of the accreditation process as a student of the Compton Community Educational Center. The one and I really didn't know what the Accreditation Task Force report was going to entail, but I thought I'd come and just say some things in regards to what the task force, some additional things the task force might need to address. I didn't realize that Peralta Community College District was in the sad state of affairs that it is, because when Compton Community College was looking for a partner, Peralta, as far away as it was from Compton, was one of the only community college districts who volunteered to assist us in maintaining our, or extend the accreditation umbrella to us. And it was subsequent to that that El Camino became involved. I was going to come to this table and preface my statements by the fact that I didn't know whether I should be in fear of the accreditation commitment's reputation, because it seems like everybody that has to deal with the accreditation circumstance and an individual by the name of Barbara Bino seems to start shaking in their boots. But as a student, I'm probably a little too stupid or something like that to know any better. But then I figured I'd just go to the 23rd Psalm and remember that, yea, though I walk through the valley of death, I fear no evil.
Yeah.
So what I'd like to suggest is that in regards to an accreditation task force, that the situation in Compton be taken into consideration, and somehow the Board of Governors or whomever can have sway, hold sway, or influence the ACCJC and its intended operation, because as I had a research project and I decided I'd do it on, if I was at Compton, I might as well research accreditation. And I found out that accreditation is something that's supposed to be assistive and not a punishing circumstance. And it seems that the outcome of the issues at Compton seem to go directly to retribution as opposed to assistance and reclamation. And I've learned that that's not fair. The biggest issue now is that somehow this commission tied El Camino's accreditation status to Compton's status, which never should have happened according to AB 318. Compton was supposed to have its issues with accreditation, and the system attached Compton's circumstance to El Camino's circumstance, and El Camino is trembling in its boots in regards to what it can do and how it's going to be affected by the decision-making processes of the Accreditation Commission in lieu of how the circumstance was supposed to be set up. So maybe your task force can investigate a little further into how the processes of the Accreditation Commission as it relates to community colleges in the state of California actually is supposed to conduct this job, as opposed to how it ends up punishing institutions for whatever reasons, good or bad. Thank you very much.
You want to say something? Chancellor Scott?
Thank you very much, Mr. Lee, for coming. Let me tell you a little bit about what did happen at Compton, although I was not the chancellor at the time that it did happen. The Accrediting Commission placed Compton College on probation and then took one step further and denied accreditation of Compton College. Therefore, it was incumbent upon the chancellor's office to try to find a solution, since these students would then be attending a college that was unaccredited, and obviously that would have serious consequences for their future academic career because they couldn't transfer unaccredited units. Finally, the solution was decided that Compton College would become an educational center under El Camino College. So right now, it's like a center, and the students who graduate, or their transcript actually reads El Camino College, Compton Center. So that's the status of it right now. It is hoped that in time, Compton College would regain its accreditation and once again be an accredited college and an independent college. Unfortunately, it's not in that status now. There was a special trustee selected under the chancellor's office by the name of Peter Landsberger, who is still a special trustee there. It is fortuitous that you came today because I've had some conversations with individuals about Compton College, including some legislators. I happen to be a personal friend to Senator Rod Wright, and I do know Assemblymember Isidore Hall. And I had a conversation with Senator Wright recently, and he and some of the other legislators and I are going to meet. Not that this is a subject of legislation, but naturally they have concerns for their constituents. I've also offered to meet with the board of Compton College, and also I've offered to meet with Barbara Bino and others about this issue. I would have to predict that if Compton College does regain its accreditation, that it would probably be something that'll take a few years. It's not something that we can do overnight, and of course, I have to be honest with you and say that this is not a decision that I'll be making, that the only way in which I'll be involved is to serve as a mediating force, because in the long run, I think most of us want to see Compton College once again accredited and once again independently operating. But that is obviously in the hands of the Accrediting Commission and not in the hands of myself. So I will give you that information. And incidentally, our board is going to be meeting at El Camino College in November. And one of the things that I think our board will want to do is to either have a report or visit the Compton College or the Compton Educational Center.
I was going to ask you to have the board just meet on the center's campus of El Camino and see what they thought about that.
Well, I think we've already made those arrangements otherwise, but thank you for bringing your concerns, and I will tell you that I understand your concerns, and these concerns have been expressed by others, and we will keep the lines of communication open.
Yes, sir. The only thing, the community of Compton would like everybody to know that they are quite appreciative of the situation that exists and how things worked out. The only thing that concerns them is that if I can sit here and state an individual's name who is purported to represent or be a part of a entity that is supposed to be diplomatic and democratic in its adjudications, then the community feels that that individual is imposing their self between the process. And they understand the length of time it's going to take, what it's going to take, but at some levels, they believe that there's some machinations that are going on that are being independently instrumented by an individual as opposed to the commission. And that's the biggest concern. So if the task force can have any impact on the commission's role when they send out people to evaluate the circumstance, and those people provide a specific recommendation, and then that individual imposes another determination on that without a fair adjudication, then the process is flawed as far as the community is concerned because they don't see any progress.
Well, we have given 7 recommendations to the Accrediting Commission. I am not going to immediately say that those recommendations were fully appreciated.
And
that's all I can say. But I want you to understand, fully understand, that an Accrediting Commission is a totally independent organization, that it is not under the control of the state of California, nor is it under the control of this chancellor's office. And it is a voluntary, accreditation is voluntary, and it is actually made up of those institutions which are part of the Accrediting Commission, and those institutions, in this case, it's the Western Association of Schools and Colleges. It includes 2-year colleges in California, both private and public, and 2-year institutions in Hawaii and in the Pacific Islands as well.
Well, one thing and I'm concluding, one thing I tell folks, a word I learned when I came back to community colleges was collegiality. I mean, in my neighborhoods, it wasn't a word that I used regularly, but I learned it when I came back to college. I understand its implication, and all the community looks forward to is that there's a collegiality aspect that's being demonstrated by the commission and that individual that I'm not supposed to mention because she's not supposed to impose herself upon the process that she has. Thanks.
Well, thank you for coming and sharing your thoughts, and we will be touring the Compton Education Center.
I'll be there to greet you at the door.
Absolutely.